Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Curious About Our Planet, brought to you by the Glasgow Science Centre. My name is Veronica. I'm going to be your host for this session, and shortly I'm going to show you a video from one of the penguin wranglers from Penguins Rock at Edinburgh Zoo. They're going to be talking all about penguins, and after that, we're going to be joined by one of the penguin wranglers, Blair, who's going to answer a few questions for us. Now, if you have any questions for a penguin wrangler, it's really fun to say, so I'm going to say it as often as I can, a penguin wrangler. If you have any questions, just pop them down below and we'll ask them for you. But for now, please enjoy this short clip.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Penguins Rock here at Edinburgh Zoo. So I'm joined by Dawn, who's one of our penguin wranglers here at the zoo. So we've got three magnificent species here. So tell us a little bit about them, where we might find them out in the wild.
Yeah, so we actually have quite a large colony here at Edinburgh. We have our Gentoo Penguins, so those are medium-sized birds, and they're quite distinctive. They have this white band that goes across the top of their head. We have our smaller species, our northern rockhoppers, which have this yellow crest coming out the top of the head, much tinier species. And then we have our large species, which are called our king penguins, very similar to emperors. Now, something you'd find in common with these species, they're all subantarctic. So you'd find them in areas like the Falkland Islands, and for a little species like the rockhoppers in places like Tristan da Cunha and the Gough Islands.
And here at Edinburgh Zoo, we're really lucky. We have this fantastic outdoor enclosure. It's one of the largest outdoor enclosures in the whole of Europe. And you can see the great big pool behind us, about 1.2 million litres of water. And for looking after these guys, how do you look after such a big enclosure and so many animals?
With a lot of work and a lot of patience. Yeah, so our day, there's normally a team of at least 2 or 3 of us that are working just with our penguins on a daily basis. And as you can imagine, a lot of that involves feeding. We actually hand feed our penguins here at Edinburgh. Now this is partly down to the fact we've got 3 different species, and the northern rockhoppers get a different fish from the gentoos and the kings, but it's also because of the number of birds that we have. So if we were to just go along and throw all their fish into the pool, it'd be really difficult for us to be able to tell which birds are eating and which aren't. Now all our birds are actually identifiable because they've got flipper bands on, so males are on the right hand side, females are on the left hand side. And they're also colour coordinated depending on who that individual is. So we can look at those colour bands and we know exactly which bird that is. And the rest of the day, as I'm sure many of you are probably aware, involves cleaning. So there's a lot of cleaning that's involved when we're looking after a penguin colony, especially someone of this size.
And what about our ever-important knighted penguin? So who is this and how do you tell them apart from the rest?
Yeah, so I mentioned our 5 king penguins earlier. And one of those king penguins is particularly important because he's actually a knighted penguin. So his full title is actually Brigadier Sir Niels Olaf, Colonel-in-Chief of the Norwegian Military Guard of Norway and the King's Guard. Now this started back in the 80s where they were over for the military tattoo. And when they come to visit the penguins here at Edinburgh, they love the king penguins that much they decided to invite one of those king penguins to be their mascot for their King's Guard. And this has progressed throughout the years to the point where a few years ago he was actually made Brigadier, and he was also made Baron of Bouvet Island. So he's not only got a title, but he also has land as well.
So why do we have penguins here at the zoo? What sort of threats are they facing out in the wild?
Yeah, so unfortunately, like many other animals, there is a lot of issues that they're having to try and battle against and compete against out in the wild. And for penguins, the fishing trade is having a big impact, so that's us sending out our ships and taking out tons and tons of different fish at a time, and unfortunately it's leaving very little for our colony, for the colonies out there. And one particular species this has had a massive impact on is our northern rockhoppers. Our northern rockhoppers are classed as an endangered species. They were given this listing in 2008. There is less than 500,000 of them now left out in the wild. Overfishing has really had a massive impact. And quite simply, it means that the parents who are on these islands trying to breed and rear their chicks, there's just not enough fish left in the water for them. Now, there has been big, massive changes. The Tristan da Cunha government have actually now banned fishing in and around the breeding season for this species. And we're also part of a research project out there looking at the dispersal of the different species. And here at the zoo, we do a lot of research with our birds as well. We look into even just simple things like how much vitamin supplements do they need, what kind of fish do they need, and this could all be then fed back to the conservation of the species out in the wild. And hopefully one day we'll be able to see those numbers increase again.
Now, in a moment, we are going to be joining Blair live from Edinburgh Zoo, who's going to chat to us a little bit about all of those wonderful penguins. And if you want to ask some questions, make sure to pop them down below. Blair, can you hear me?
I can, yes, absolutely. Welcome live here to Edinburgh Zoo. So my name is Blair, I'm one of the education officers here. And again, if you have any questions you'd like to ask us right now about any of our penguins or any of the other animals that we have in the collection, do just send them in and we'll get those back to you. So I'm going to give you a little closer look at what's happening in the penguin colony right now. So I'm just going to swap my camera around. Here we are, hopefully. Here we are. So this is live here in Edinburgh Zoo. You can have a look out for our penguins anytime you like, actually. We are lucky enough here at Edinburgh Zoo, we have a live webcam. So right now, on the wall opposite us, there's a little white ball up above the penguins, and that's a live webcam that you can see our penguins anytime you like. And it is a beautiful time of year to see our penguins here at Edinburgh Zoo, because they're just going, they're right in the middle of their breeding season right now. Now we have just shy of 100 Gentoo penguins, and the Gentoo penguin is the third tallest type of penguin in the world. They look quite plain, white front, black back, as you'd expect with a penguin, but Gentoos have a white stripe across the top of their heads, and hopefully you see that in the one who's walking down to the water just now, just going for a dip. In they go, and off they go, swimming down to the far end. We've got one of the biggest penguin pools in the world here at Edinburgh Zoo, 65 metres long, over 3 metres deep, and that's because penguins spend most of their lives in the water. 70% of their lives they spend out at sea swimming, and you might see some more of our penguins swimming towards us from the deep end. They're just turning around there on the surface, you can see them. So we are right in the middle of our breeding season. We have just shy of 100 Gentoo adults, but we've added to that already. There are 10 chicks that we have here at Edinburgh Zoo, and the chicks are the ones who are still on the nests. You can't quite see them because they're hunkered down under their mums and their dads. Mum and dad take it in turns to sit on the nest, keep the eggs warm and safe from predators, and even when the chicks hatch, mum and dad still incubate them. They still keep them warm by sitting on them. And you can actually tell which ones have had their chicks hatch already, because you'll notice some of the nests have a little lid on, a little roof. Most of them are blue or grey, and those nests who have the roofs on, they will have their chicks having hatched already. And what's really quite nice is that Gentoos tend to have 2 babies at a time. So they always have a brother or a sister with them in there. It's kind of tricky to tell our boy and girl penguins apart here at the zoo when they hatch. We need to give them a blood test, because actually the boys and the girls look almost identical to each other. Even if you check between the legs, penguins have very different sexual organs to us. So you'll find that they both have something called a cloaca, which is just simply a hole that they pee from, they poo from. And it's where they lay their eggs from as well. So that's how our penguins work. We give them a blood test, and after that, you'll have heard that we give them a little label. Every single one of our penguins has a flipper band on. And the cue is, and you can do this on the webcam, you might even see it from here. If the flipper band is on the right flipper, it's a boy. If the flipper band is on the left flipper, it's a girl. Now, if there's any questions that have started coming in yet, I can start taking those, or I can still keep on prattling on. I can prattle for Scotland.
I am enjoying the prattling on. Is that a water slide that I can see?
It is, of course there's a water slide. Why wouldn't we give penguins a water slide?
I know, that's the best thing I've ever seen. I'm waiting for that guy to go.
As part of the enrichment we give them. So they've got a waterfall, they've got diving boards, they've got water slides, anything to make their enclosure a little bit more interesting, so that basically they can express some of their natural behaviours. So whether that's slipping along on their fronts, or whether that's jumping off higher rocks, we can do that. But we need to make sure there's a nice gentle slope most of the times, because if a penguin's going to get out of the water, they need to be able to slide themselves out on these nice slopes. So we've designed the enclosure so that they can live long, happy lives and show off all their best features, like our penguin underwater is just doing there.
He's having a great time.
Yes.
It's like a little leisure park for them, especially with all those little parasols. I know they're for the young, but it does look like a bit like a resort. I do have a question from YouTube coming up.
Yeah.
From RoboDuck. Ooh.
Do
penguins have leaders? And if so, do they determine which?
That is a fantastic question. Now, there's lots of animals who have sort of hierarchies, and you get high-ranking individuals and low-ranking individuals. I think particularly of our chimpanzees right now, where you've got a big alpha male who's the biggest and strongest, and he fights his way to the top. Penguins, not so much. They've got a colony, and actually what they try to do is they try to find a pair. Most of the time, though, they actually get on really well with each other. When it comes to finding a pair with our Gentoos, they don't fight to impress the ladies. No, no, no. The boys can be quite cute. I'll tell you what they do. So our Gentoo penguin boys, I'll actually show you. La 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 la. Here we go. So if I was a Gentoo penguin boy and I liked a girl, what I would do is to try to get to know her, to flirt effectively, what we call a courtship display. I would pick up a pebble in my beak, I'd bring it to the girl I like and drop it beside her. And if the girl likes the boy, she accepts that pebble into her nest. If she doesn't like the boy, she picks it up and chucks it back in his face. It's a hard life being a Gentoo penguin boy. Before it even gets to helping the girl make a nest though, even in the depths of winter, around about December, every year our penguins breed in the spring. In the depth of winter, you can see our boys trying to impress the girls. The first thing they do to impress the girl is called a bow hiss. I'll show you what it looks like. I'm going to pop you down slowly. So if I like the girl that I'm looking at, I bow towards her, and on the way back up, I go. Admittedly, it's not particularly attractive. If I was a Gentoo penguin boy, that's how we impress the girls.
Oh, that's wonderful.
If the girl likes the boy back, she bow hisses back, and they bow hiss together in tandem. Nice. Now, let's have a look.
That's romance.
It is romance. Let's have a look at those penguins again. And actually, as you're over there, you might even see a little bit of penguins giving gifts of pebbles, or of course a little bow hiss between the pairs, because that's even cute. At this late stage in the year, they're still forming their bonds and making their relationships, which is lovely. So no big hierarchy, no big fights, all just lovely pairs who've got to know each other by bowing and giving gifts. Very gentlemanlike Gentoos. The rockhopper penguins we keep, they live over there. We separate them off because they do fight in the breeding season. It's all about fighting over a position on the hillside. The higher up the hill you can get for a rockhopper, the better looking they are to the girls. So every species is different.
Right.
Have we got any other questions?
We do indeed. The next question will be from our schools that we have watching. Howard Primary asks, why are penguins taken from their natural habitat to be placed in zoos for people to look at?
Fantastic question. And actually, the simple answer is, these days, they're not. Now, all the penguins that you see before me have been born in a zoo. Lots of them here at Edinburgh Zoo. Lots in other zoos around the world. As I say, we've had 10 babies this year. They're all actually descended from animals that were taken out of the wild almost 100 years ago. Edinburgh Zoo was the very first zoo in the world to breed penguins. That happened in 1919. And this is where the captive breeding program started. So that was 102 years ago. We had a king penguin chick born here. And yeah, we're still kind of smug about it to this day. We still prattle on about it because it's what put Edinburgh Zoo on the map. And you know what? It's where the captive breeding program started. So nowadays, what you see is the penguins in our zoo were born in a zoo, and the more babies we have, the more of these Gentoo penguins, or king or rock hoppers, the other species we hold, that are alive in the world. And the more of these animals there are alive in the world, the safer they are from extinction. So as I say, we don't take animals out of the wild anymore. The only animals in our zoo who were born in the wild are actually rescues, animals that had been taken from the pet trade, like our sun bears or some of our snowy owls. So there are some animals which were born in the wild, but not taken out of the wild by zoos. Good zoos don't do that anymore. Good zoos breed. We get more of the animals to make them safer from extinction. That's our job.
Oh, well, that's really good to hear. We do have another question from the schools again. It'll appear shortly. From Bushes Primary, they ask, do you have a favourite type of penguin? And if so, what is it called?
Now, that's a really good question. So we hold here 3 different species of penguins. There are actually about 18 different types of penguin around the world. Of the 3 we have, our Gentoos are obviously very gentleman-like with their bowing and their hissing, and they're the penguins we have most of here in the zoo. The king penguins, you might even see a king penguin on the very far side. They're over in the corner hiding. But they're actually the second tallest type of penguin in the world. Look a bit like an emperor. You'll have seen them in the video. And of course, we have Niels Olaf, Sir Niels Olaf, Brigadier and all. He's over there in the corner. But even though they're the first type of penguin in the world that we bred, there's something really special to us. But you know what? For me, it's all about the rock hoppers. I can't quite see them from our angle. They get separated over into a second enclosure, our creche area at this time of year, so they don't fight all the Gentoos and the rock hopper and the king penguins. I don't love them because they fight, but actually the rock hoppers are the most endangered type of penguin we have. We had 1 born this year, and although we get really excited, you might even start seeing some of the Gentoo chicks on the nests. There's a blue nest sort of further back just underneath the white webcam. One of the parents is sitting up, and you might see some movement of a baby under there. That's one of the Gentoo chicks.
I see it.
There's 10 Gentoo chicks, and that's really exciting. But you know what? 1 rockhopper chick, they are far more endangered than the Gentoos. Some rockhopper colonies have gone down by 99% in the last 50 years. That means if you were a colony 50 years ago on the island, you might have seen 100,000 penguins. This year, you'll see 1,000. Now, to the untrained eye, that looks like there's loads of penguins. 1,000 penguins sounds loads. But actually, when you consider how far they've fallen in the last 50 years, it's really clear that they're falling towards zero. There's a real risk of extinction. So the fact that we have our most endangered type of penguin, the northern rockhopper here in the zoo, that's what makes them our favourite, my favourite at least. Because as I say, they're the ones who need the conservation most. They're the ones who need the captive breeding programme and help in the wild. And actually, by coming to visit Edinburgh Zoo, we raise money. We're a conservation charity, though. You don't make anyone any richer. The pay is aggressively mediocre, trust me on that. Instead, every time you come to the zoo, you raise money for our conservation charity, RZSS, who help conserve penguins out in the wild. We've got a project called Project Penguin that helps rockhoppers and other species out in the South Atlantic Ocean. And that's all funded by people coming to visit our zoo.
Well, that was an excellent answer. Our next question is from Twitter. Megan from Alcusson Primary asks, how old is the oldest penguin and what is his name?
The very oldest penguin just now, I think, is Mrs. Spain. Mrs. Spain is a penguin who has actually she's a female, so she's got her flipper band on the left flipper, and it's red and yellow after the colours of the Spanish flag. Mrs. Spain's actually in her 30s right now. I think she's about 33 or 34, Mrs. Spain. One of our oldest, who's just shy of 30, you can see though, in the middle of the colony, you might just spot a grey-backed penguin. He's actually sat behind you see the bright blue nest at the very front and centre of the picture. There's a light grey splodge behind the 2 who are on that nest. That light grey splodge is actually the back of a penguin. He's called Snowflake, and we call him Snowflake because he doesn't have a black back. He's got a light grey back. It's just a genetic mutation, a bit like how I've got ginger hair and you might have brown hair. He's got a genetic mutation that gives him light grey feathers on his back. that's Snowflake. He's one of the oldest ones we have. So you can see him. He's just coming up to his 30th birthday soon. And because he's been around for so long, he's not just a dad. He's not just a granddad or a great-granddad or a great-great-granddad or even a great-great-great-granddad. I believe that Snowflake has become a great-great-great-great-great-granddad. And that's because he's been around a long time. They're able to breed from just the age of 2, and they can have babies every year. And Snowflake's done a fantastic job for the captive breeding program, and we can always tell because he's got some fairly unique genetics. So when the babies come out with a light grey back, we know Snowflake has been having more babies. So that's Snowflake. They're quite a long-lived species, but they can have babies quite early in life, and it's why they can have so many babies in their lifetime.
That's amazing. We have yet another question for you from YouTube. What else do they get for enrichment? Do they get blocks of ice with food in them?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the water, the water itself here at Edinburgh Zoo is enrichment. Enrichment is anything which allows the animals to display their natural behaviours. So of course, penguins who spend most of their life in the water, how do you enrich them? One of the main things to do is make sure they've got enough water to express that behaviour of swimming. But yeah, they get nice floats in the water that allow them to balance and to sort of bobble on top of the surface as if they were on an ice floe. But yeah, one of the ways that we feed them, most of our penguins, as you see, are hand-fed. One of the keepers is doing it over there to ensure they get enough and to ensure that the keepers can see that the animals are healthy by working closely with them. But as a little treat, as we see a crow flying across with a fish over there, what we'll see is that the keepers sometimes do what's called a scatter feed, scattering fish into the water so that the penguins have to chase each other to get them first. And yeah, as a bit of a slow release treat, we actually freeze lots of fish in an ice block sometimes, chuck it in from the bridge over there and let it slowly melt. And that releases fish more slowly over a course of actually a couple of hours it can take for all the fish to come out. And that keeps our penguins really excited, swimming around and around the ice block, waiting for the next one to become available to eat. So it encourages these animals to swim, to use their muscles and all their behavioral adaptations they'd use in the wild to survive. And that's what we're all about, making sure that these animals are still behaving, not just genetically still penguins, but are behaving still like wild penguins.
It's really good to hear that you are enriching their lives like that. We have more questions for you coming in.
Yeah, of course.
From Howard Primary, what is the hardest part of the job being a discovery and learning officer, and do you like it and why?
I mean, no, I never got into my job because I thought I was going to stay there long. I started my job on a maternity leave cover for 3 days a week 7 years ago. I was only meant to be there 6 months, and I was meant to be working alongside being a secondary school teacher. I trained as a biology secondary school teacher. But basically, they got their hooks in. It's absolutely wonderful being in the zoo. I have to say, there's not really any downside. I get to talk about penguins for a living. It is as complicated as that, really. It is absolutely wonderful. In this last year, it's been really hard. You know, we've not been able to be open to the public for months on end. We've not been able to have school groups come and visit us for over a year now. Other than on self-guided things. So we've had to adapt a lot in this last year to be able to actually, present like this virtually, to develop things which can be done by you guys at home or at school. And that's been a big challenge this last year. It's not what a lot of people in education got into education to do things online or virtually. But it has been really rewarding. It's been working really well. But we cannot wait to have people back on site joining us at Edinburgh Zoo or our sister site, the Han Wildlife Park. Can't wait to have people come back and join us because things will get easier and more enjoyable when that happens. Less tech issues, I find, don't you?
Absolutely, I can get you there. But I'm pretty sure there's a lot of the public that are absolutely desperate to come and see these beautiful creatures and have you talk to them. I'm sure we've got more questions. They're coming in. Next one, St. James Primary. They ask, do you have any favourite animals at the zoo or penguins in particular with certain personality traits?
Personality traits of our penguins. I mean, penguins all look different, but they do have different personalities. You can see Snowflake still with that light grey back I was mentioning. One of the reasons that he's become a great grandfather is because he is very popular with the ladies. Every year he finds a girl to make a nest with. He picks up a pebble, brings it to the girl, and it gets accepted. He bow hisses very nicely. So he finds a female to breed with every year. He also has a reputation for finding some of his neighbours' females as well. So whilst penguins are only meant to pair up with one female every year, Snowflake's got a bit of a reputation for sneaking around some of the boys' back. I'm not saying he's my favourite because of that, but it's certainly a fairly interesting story. In terms of other animals in the zoo, we've got some amazing characters. Some are brand new. We've got 5 giraffes just arrived in the last few days who I'm trying to get to know and learn the differences between. All 5 boys have just arrived in the last week, which is so exciting. We also have births. We have a pygmy hippo baby called Amara who just got her name the other day. She is only about 6 weeks old, and you could still hold her in your hands. So a hippo you could hold in your hands. She's absolutely adorable and a real sort of fighter as well. I saw her learning to swim by paddling in the shallow end, which was just amazing. But in terms of my favourite, in terms of the animals, we've got our western grey kangaroos. Our male Hemsworth, he's called Hemsworth because he's big, Australian and muscly like the actors. Hemsworth is fantastic, and he's been a great dad. He actually started having babies at the same time as me. So whilst he's got 2 boys, I've got 2 boys, so I get all sentimental about Hemsworth. But what's really sweet is that you see Hemsworth, unlike most of the dads in the zoo who breed and let the mums do all the hard work, Hemsworth has actually been teaching his sons how to box, so that when they become older, they'll get better at fighting, and he might have a good chance of being a granddad. And it's just wonderful seeing these animals interacting and playing with each other, and at ease, safe from the threats that they would face in the wild otherwise. So yeah, our western grey kangaroos, I just love them way too much.
Well, that's a lot of animals to choose from. We have more questions to get through. Let's see. Banging in primary, are penguins' habitats in danger in the wild?
Absolutely, but you know what? They're so diverse, the habitats. Penguins don't just live on the ice sheets of Antarctica, which of course are suffering from climate change and global warming and melting of ice caps. Penguins can be found all the way right up to the tropics. There are penguins who live in New Zealand, there are penguins who live in South America and Africa, tropical islands like the Galapagos, and so many of them are struggling. But of course, not only is it the issues on the land, whether it's invasive species, rats eating their eggs, whether it is habitat loss by humans displacing them off islands so they can have beach resorts. It's also what's happening in the ocean. That's where they spend 70% of their lives. So when we do have overfishing and there's not enough fish to eat, it's a real struggle for these animals. When the waters are becoming less salty because of melting ice caps, whether they're becoming warmer, what we can see is massive issues in terms of not just whether the penguins can still survive in the water, but whether their food can survive in the water, and whether their food moves away from the islands that they're tethered to for breeding purposes. So there's so much uncertainty in the future about penguins, because when we change the natural world, and humans have been changing the natural world so much, animals have to adapt to that change. And if they can't adapt, they may not survive at all. So yeah, across the southern hemisphere, you can find penguins everywhere, but so many of them are struggling, and we're seeing population trends going down for the vast majority of penguin species. Any other questions?
Yeah, of course. We've got lots and lots of questions for you here. Are penguins better adapted to harsh and colder climates? Are they comfortable within the enclosure, and how do you accommodate them?
I mean, harsh and colder climates, that's pretty much how most people describe Edinburgh, to be fair.
I won't argue there.
No, I mean, these are animals who are actually from the Falkland Islands, South Georgia, cold, wet, windy islands in the South Atlantic Ocean. Just like we are here in Edinburgh, a cold, wet, windy island in the North Atlantic Ocean as part of the UK. So, yeah, absolutely. We've got one of our Gentoos coming past here.
Oh, hi.
She's lovely. So yeah, this is actually the perfect climate to keep them in. They're really happy in this area. Some penguins would actually be too cold for. Some penguins would be too hot for. So we don't keep emperor penguins. But in general, it's thought that penguins actually evolved not in Antarctica, not with the ice. In general, it's thought that actually penguins probably evolved in New Zealand, which actually has a really similar climate here to Scotland. So the insulation, all the body fat, it's not necessarily to keep them warm on land. It's actually to keep them warm whilst they're diving in the ocean looking for their food, whether it's fish or krill or squid. And that depends on which penguins you're talking about mostly. As I say, all of them have their own little preferences.
So they are pretty comfortable there.
Yeah.
Amazing. I'm pretty sure we've got more questions. Oh, here we are from Arkleson Primary. Brooke asks, how do they keep cool?
Fantastic question. We've got three main reasons, ways that we help them keep cool. One, we keep them in the right climate. So we keep penguins who are used to this sort of climate. Sometimes check out that blue sky. It's positively dangerous. When we've got so much unnatural exposure to sunlight. Sorry, I've got red hair, obviously, so I don't like blue sky. What we see is that we give them those sunshades over there. They also help to shelter the chicks from too much rain and wetness as well. So the sunshades help them to keep dry, to keep cool. We also put sprinklers on to keep the chicks cool when they're on the nest, to stop them overheating, and the adults can just go for a dip in the swimming pool anytime they like. So lots of ways we help them to keep cool. But as I say, we're actually in Scotland, it's not too much of an issue. Most of our animals in our collection, of course, we need to worry about quite the opposite. How do we keep them warm? So lots of heated indoor houses for our tropical animals. Any other questions?
With other animals, you have to make sure they're nice and cozy. It is quite a different challenge with those penguins. Our next question is from the janitor. Do you put special rocks in the enclosure to help those gentoos flirt, or do they find out for themselves? I was wondering that as well. Do you provide those pebbles?
Yes, we do. Every year we put in tens of thousands of pebbles to help our penguins flirt with each other. We actually put them in specially as well, because if you had them in the enclosure the whole time, what you'll see is that actually all these surfaces are actually quite bare, and the reason is so that they're easily cleaned. Penguins poo so much you can actually track them from space. Genuinely, that's how researchers are trying to track where penguins are in Antarctica, by finding out where the colonies are by looking from space using satellite images at the smears of poo they leave behind them as they go. So penguins poo lots. So as a result,
the use of the word smear.
Our keepers spend huge portions of their day hosing down the enclosure to keep it clean, to stop all these pests and parasites potentially building up. So all the areas are designed to be hosable. Pebbles on them would actually mean that parasites build up and we might have unhealthy penguins. So what we do is we only put the pebbles in for the breeding season and we take them out afterwards. Also, knowing our penguins, they are quite clumsy. They'd end up dropping them in the bottom of the pool, and year on year the pool would get shallower and shallower because of all the pebbles they've lost in the bottom. So that's what we do. We bring them in for the breeding species season especially, and then we take them back out again once they're finished and put them back in the next year.
Well, there's quite a lot to contend with there. I didn't realise that penguins were so smelly, but you learn something new every day.
Between them and the rhino house behind me, it's quite a pungent area of the zoo.
Oh dear. We should have thought out those placements better, or maybe just group all the smelly ones together. That'll make more sense.
Exactly. They send me here because I've actually got no sense of smell. I'm an anosmic, so they don't mind me going down to the penguins and the rhinos because I don't know any better. It's grand.
Well, that works out for the best, doesn't it? We have more questions for you.
Of course. From
Lockfield Primary. What type of everyday tasks do you do apart from your cleaning up poo?
Well, personally, I'm spending a lot of my time these days doing virtual tours just like this. So we've got them available to schools across Scotland. Otherwise, what I'm currently doing is we get lots of sort of seasonal projects and stuff. So I've got a nice little scheme which is happening in the summer, which is going to have hopefully about 100 sort of 16 to 18-year-old kids coming along and spending a week at the zoo. So a bit of boring admin. Right now, their application deadline for that's just passed, so I'm actually marking all their applications to find out who gets to come along to that lovely free course. So doing things to help people learn and sort of get ahead in their career in terms of zoology and working in zoos, hopefully. Yeah.
Oh, excellent. So you definitely keep yourself busy day to day.
Oh,
Our
yes.
next question is you have 3 species of penguins with you. Do they all get along? I know you touched on this earlier a little bit, but can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, they do tend to get along. They share the enclosure for most parts of the year. We've actually got a bit of Gentoo breeding going on the other side of the water from us right now. You'll see one of our Gentoo
Lovely.
on top of the other. That's the next generation getting created. Obviously, they get along with people in their own species. You might actually see one of the penguins just stole a pebble from behind them whilst they were distracted. That's lovely. I said the gifting of pebbles was quite a romantic thing, but you'll see shamelessly they're going in thinking they're distracted. I can steal some nice pebbles from my girl there. That's ridiculous. Shameless thievery. Someone should alert the police. Anyways,
the drama that is going on within this colony.
That's why the live webcam's so great. Just pop on any stage.
It's better than a soap opera.
When our rock hoppers are in the breeding season, as they are just now, they can get a wee bit feisty about anyone who comes near their pebbles and comes near their part of the enclosure. So we separate them off. But actually, at this time of year, otherwise, outside of the breeding season, they all get on really quite nicely. They do tend to associate with their own species, though. So you'll find the king penguins are, as you'd expect, all over in the corner together, all 5 of them. We've got the Gentoos all choose to make their nests next to each other as a colony, safety in numbers after all. And actually, even the rock hoppers who aren't overbreeding just now, they tend to hang out with the other rock hoppers in slightly rockier parts of the enclosure. So they all have their own little preferences. They like being amongst their own species, and I suppose that's just the way that they've evolved. So it's interesting to see, but there's no hostility really between them, other than if they try and actively steal from each other, whether that's fish or whether that's pebbles for making nests.
I see. Well, our next question for you, Bush's Primary asks, do penguins breathe in water? And what type of fish do they eat?
Wonderful questions. Now, they are birds, so just like all birds, they breathe air, so using lungs just like we do. So they get oxygen out of the air just as we would do. They actually have to hold their breath. To help them do that, they actually have quite special blood. Their blood has 4 times as much hemoglobin in it than ours does. Now, hemoglobin is a special protein that binds with oxygen. So by having 4 times as much hemoglobin, that means that they can store a lot more oxygen in their blood than we can, and that helps them hold their breath. Also, unlike me, when I get doused in water, I start to panic and my blood pressure goes up, my heart rate goes up. When they're underwater, they don't panic. They actually slow their heart rate. So it goes down to about a quarter of that it would be above the surface. So by slowing their heart rate and by having more of that special protein in their blood, hemoglobin, it allows them to conserve their oxygen for longer, so they can hold their breath for several minutes quite happily whilst chasing fish under the water. So yeah, that's how they breathe underwater. They don't breathe underwater, they just hold their breath a long time. What type of fish are they chasing? Well, actually, our Gentoos prefer squid in the wild. Our rock hoppers prefer krill, a type of crustacean. And our king penguins are the real fish hunting specialists. But here in the zoo, the main fish that they're fed on is whiting. It's not a fish which is particularly popular with humans to eat, and that means it's a bit cheaper for us to buy in. But actually, it's exactly what the penguins need to have long, healthy lives and a nice balanced diet. So whiting is the type of fish we feed them.
Oh, lovely. Sounds delicious. Our next question for you. As we know, penguin numbers are declining due to the overfishing and climate change. How can we and the people at home help?
Fantastic question. Now, I mean, there's lots of things that you can do at home. Remember, with climate change, it might be affecting some very exotic, far-flung parts of the world, but so much of climate change is happening, right on our doorstep. Every time we go into a car, which is burning petrol, it contributes to climate change. The boilers in our house making hot water for us to have a shower or a bath in, quite often gas-powered, contributes to climate change when we burn these fossil fuels. So trying to think about ways that you can either reduce your usage or actually change how your energy is coming from. There's being big pushes globally in the next few years about converting petrol cars to electric cars, moving away from gas boilers in houses to hydrogen boilers or electric boilers. So there's always things that you can do about thinking about how you can reduce what you're using or change where it's coming from. Another big issue for penguins is plastic as well. Litter gets blown into rivers. Rivers flow out to the sea. And actually plastic can be shiny And penguins associate anything that's shiny with fish
Right.
scales. They don't question it, they swallow it. And there are penguins who are starving to death out in the wild because of the amount of plastic pollution out there. So using less plastic, using less energy, put a jumper on rather than turn the heating up, that sort of stuff is the best things to be doing to help. Because if everyone makes those small differences, it can cause a huge difference to the natural world and hopefully help these animals to survive.
Well, I'm hoping that we can do everything we can to help these wonderful creatures stay here in the world. Now, I just can't help but notice, but is that a large penguin in the background there?
That's actually one of our keepers over there.
Oh, is
She's on
it?
the, I'll try not to pass on that she was easily mistaken. No white front, that's the easiest way of telling them apart. Penguins
Right,
always have a
okay,
white
I'll
front and
remember
a
that.
black back. Any other questions?
Yeah, of course, we've got lots of questions for you. St James Primary ask, what is the most fascinating thing about the penguins?
I think penguins are amazing on so many different levels. You know, the fact that we can see genetics at play with that white-backed penguin snowflake over there. The fact you can look at evolution, all the adaptations they have when it comes to, you know, even down to their blood, as I was saying, or how they slow their heart rate. Amazing little adaptations that help them survive. We can even look at evolution. You know, there's 18 different types of penguin, but they're all related to each other. Our king penguins look very closely related to emperor penguins. And when you look at the genetics, that all plays out. But they've actually become slightly different because of, you know, speciation. They've been isolated on different islands and become different over time and adapted to what they needed to survive on that new island, whether it was to be colder, whether it was to be warmer, whether there was bigger food supplies or smaller food supplies. Each penguin's adapted in its own way. So I think penguins are an amazing species, and not just one species, lots of species combined, of course. But across the 18, you can look at all aspects of biology and learn so much more about them just by using penguins as case studies. I can spend hours down here teaching the entire biology curriculum, I'm pretty sure. And I'd be very happy doing so, because as I say, I do prattle on quite a bit.
Well, we are enjoying it. I was just thinking, as you were saying there, if Snowflake gets his way, then eventually, sooner probably than we think, that most of the penguins within your enclosure would have a little bit of silver on their backs.
Well, perhaps. Now, that's what we have to do in the zoo. We need to think about, you know, is that something we want to happen? In the wild, Snowflake has a great time in the zoo and lives a long, happy life. In the wild, Snowflake probably wouldn't have survived very long. And that's because that black back helps with the marine camouflage that they need to survive. It's called counter shading. Lots of marine animals have it. So if you're in the water looking up, you see a white front of a penguin against the white light of the sky, looking against the white of the sunlight coming down. If you're in the water looking down at a penguin, you see the black back of the penguin against the
I
deep
love
dark
this
floor.
penguin's about to demonstrate for us.
Exactly. So they blend in with that black back. Problem is, when Snowflake goes in the water, he sticks out like a sore thumb. Light grey back against the deep dark ocean floor. He's not got that camouflage. So unfortunately, leucistic penguins, like we call these light grey back penguins in the wild, leucistic penguins do hatch, but they don't survive very long. And that usually means that their genetics, they die with them because they've not survived long enough to have any babies. Here in the zoo, Snowflakes had lots of babies, but what we need to then question is, do we want lots of leucistic genes? Because actually, they're not something which helps them survive. It's not something which we naturally get lots of, and that's why with our penguin Snowflake, they might consider things like contraceptives just to make sure that we don't have too many of Snowflake's babies out there. It's actually good practice in general as well. If Snowflake does have too many babies, like any other individual, it becomes very hard to stop his babies having babies with each other. Half the population of the penguins in a colony here could be Snowflake's babies if we weren't careful, because he is, as I say, very popular.
Very, very popular penguin indeed.
Yes.
We have more questions for you. Next one is, let's see, if you had any advice for those watching that would like to work with penguins or any other animals, what kind of jobs are available and what qualifications do you need?
Fantastic question. So in terms of working directly with the penguins, you know, we've got a fantastic team of vets here at the zoo. We've got 4 vets, but of course it's the penguin keepers who work most closely with the animals. For veterinary sort of careers, there's a very clear sort of career path, I suppose. keepers, there's less of a career path there, which is sort of long established. There's lots of different ways to get into zookeeping, you know, whether it is further study by looking at sort of degrees in zoology or ecology, whether it's actually trying to get yourself hands-on experience. You know, one of the most important things is to actually get experience working directly with animals, whether that's volunteering or whether that's through actual job placements. It's one of the most important things to get that job experience. With zookeeping itself, very rarely is there actually sort of a minimum sort of qualification you need. What you really need to do is stand out in your CV from the experience you have, hopefully. And a lot of the qualifications, things like the DIMSA, you actually study as you work. So you can be a trainee zookeeper, work in the zoo as a zookeeper, but not be fully qualified yet. So most of the professional qualifications you actually only start doing once you've got a job as a zookeeper. Before that, volunteering, get your foot in the door by volunteering at a zoo, or even if it's at a farm. As much hands-on experience working with animals as possible is the best way of getting into those trainee keeper positions. They are very popular, as you can imagine, though. It's a hard career, but it's one which is incredibly rewarding and very desirable, very competitive field, which is one of the reasons I think they justify paying keepers very, very little money as well. It's not something you get into to get rich. It's not something you get into for an easy life, but it is an amazing career, and so many people, including Gemma and Lorna, you can see over there, two of our penguin keepers, absolutely love it. It's very much a vocation for them. Anyway,
You're
yes.
having a great time. But that does seem to be excellent advice. So your advice is just to ask, not just with yourselves, but any sort of animal keeping whatsoever, just to start volunteering and getting more and more experience and building up your experience that way. Excellent
Absolutely.
answer. Our next question is, let's see. It's from Lawfield Primary. P5B ask, what is the oldest animal in the zoo, and can you tell us more about it?
Fantastic question. The oldest animals, people often think about, you know, some of the bigger animals. You know, are the rhinos going to be the oldest? Maybe the chimpanzees, because they're really closely related to us. They can get very old, yes, but actually the oldest ones we have are our flamingos. Not all of the flamingos. We've got around about 20 in the zoo, but 3 of them were actually born back in the 1960s. So they're into they're into their 60s now. Some of our flamingos, which is fantastically good going, and we don't actually know when some of them were born. Some of them were actually taken from the wild back in the 60s. So they were actually part of the founding.
Older theoretically.
Yeah. The estimate and the records suggest they were about 3 years old back then. So that's the best guess, but we don't know exactly how old they are. Their birth records basically say it's the 1st of January they were born on. Every animal's got its birthday registered, but when it's the 1st of January, you can tell they didn't really have a clue. Because, again, that was actually part of the founding population for starting the captive breeding program that we've been breeding from ever since. So that's been 60 years ago. Zoos are very different even 60 years ago. You'd see strange things like elephant rides, chimpanzee tea parties, things which you wouldn't even imagine modern zoos doing. Zoos have really changed, and the priority, as I say, is all about conservation, making sure we're safeguarding these species from extinction and doing what's right for the individuals and what's best for the species as a whole. But as I say, that's some of our flamingos up into their 60s now.
That's incredible. It's such a surprising answer as well. But it's one of those that sort of within living memory that you can see the journey that zoos have taken from this sort of entertainment with animals to more of a conservation, educational viewpoint with these animals.
Absolutely. But again, in terms of that, it's all been alongside sort of advancements in animal welfare. You know, making sure that actually, you know, the focus isn't on are the visitors leaving having had a good time. It's, you know, are the visitors leaving and the animals have had a good time whilst they were here. You know, there is a balancing act, making sure that people can see these animals, but, you know, making sure that these animals are living their best lives and are not just healthy but happy with it. And you can see
it is incredibly important.
As our penguins start playing in the water, you can tell they're actually not too bad just now. Those two just started having a nice little chase of each other, which is nice.
It is lovely to see that and to see how happy these penguins are and how large your enclosure is. Is it big enough for them?
Yeah, so we've got actually one of the largest enclosures in the world for penguins.
Mm-hmm.
It's the biggest one in Europe. So the swimming pool, as I say, is over 65 meters long, over 3 meters deep. So every single one of our penguins could be in the water at the same time, and they'd still not have plenty of room to do loop-de-loops and twirls without bumping. So yeah, it's one of the biggest ones in the world, and as I say, there doesn't seem to be anything. We monitor animals' welfare constantly to make sure that we're looking after them. And from all the monitoring, all the research we're doing, everything seems to be suggesting these are pretty good, healthy, but also well-rounded, mentally healthy animals as well.
They do seem pretty healthy, like nipping it in and out of the water there. But we've got our last question coming up from our school. Ooh, this is a good question. Have any of the penguins ever escaped?
Now, there's an urban legend about someone going to Edinburgh Zoo. It's always someone's uncle we hear. Someone's uncle who went to Edinburgh, picked up a penguin, stuck it in his bag, and took it away. And my uncle stole a penguin once. From any
I heard
records,
that one. I heard that exact rumor.
Everyone whose uncle stole a penguin. From all of our records, we can conclusively say we've got absolutely no record of that happening if it ever did, and we'd be immensely surprised and also possibly hire that uncle who managed to pick up a penguin without getting a serious bite. Our penguin keepers know too well that our penguins look cute and cuddly, but as soon as you try and pick them up for a vet check, they will have you. They've got sharp beaks that they do not mind sticking in any part of your body, and the idea of one passively being carried away isn't very likely. The one time we did have an escape, one of the keepers way back in the day left the penguin enclosure unlocked as he walked away with his bucket of fish at the end of the day, and half the penguins poured out the enclosure after him and followed him. Basically, they followed the keeper around because he was stinking of fish. So the keeper, upon looking back after 50 meters and realizing what had happened, ran himself back into the enclosure, and the penguins followed. And he actually worked out. That was quite fun. People seem to enjoy it. And that's how the penguin parade started here at Edinburgh Zoo. So in normal times, we bring the penguins out of the enclosure. They walk around this play park all the way down that road over here. So it's about 150 metres. And they walk around in a penguin parade. And that was all started because of, let's say, a bit of inspiration rather than what was probably a bit of a catastrophic accident that happily worked out well. So yeah, penguin escapes. Yeah, that's why we've got the penguin parade now.
Well, that's amazing, and what a lovely note to wrap up. Now, Blair, I would like to thank you so much for joining us today. It has been amazing. We enjoyed your video and your penguin tour. It has been a highlight for me. I've really enjoyed it. And to the schools at home and everyone watching, thank you so much for joining us here at Curious About Our Planet with Edinburgh Zoo.
You're very welcome, guys. Thank you so much for joining us.